is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks. We're going to start and sit here for Week 6 fantasy football. And full disclosure, there's not a lot of guys that I really love this week. I know bye weeks have started. We are going to be without a few guys who have been some fantasy viable options here over the last couple weeks. Jared Goff, other than last week. Of course, we won't have Derek Carr either. Ryan Tannehill has provided a little bit of fantasy value at times. We'll not have those guys this week, along with Davis Mills in Houston, who nobody was starting anyway, but we're not going to waste a whole lot of time. If you like diving right into the content, hit the like button, because we're kicking it off here Thursday Night Football, the Washington Commandos and Chicago Bears. And we'll start off with Carson Wentz, who is basically like a tale of two quarterbacks at this time, because you never know which one is going to show up. Right now, he's making a lot of mistakes maybe on the field, but he's still producing fantasy points. He's currently quarterback 8 overall, and has had 3 games so far on this young season with multiple touchdowns in each of those games. He's doing it also without Jahan Dotson. Didn't have Logan Thomas last week either, but it's because they're throwing the ball so much in Washington. They're averaging 42 pass attempts per game, which is third most in the NFL. Now they get a matchup going up against the Chicago Bears, who allow right around 17 fantasy points per game. Dyami Brown is banged up. Logan Thomas is banged up. Jahan Dotson is banged up. And even Carson Wentz himself is somewhat questionable to play. I think it's kind of his pride hurting right now after the remarks by Ron Rivera earlier in the week, when he mentioned that the biggest issue in the rebuilding process of Washington has been the quarterback, which is not what you want to hear the head coach saying in the press. Now, they're dealing with a lot of injuries right now on this offense. Thursday Night Football, typically not overly exciting. A lot of mistakes typically happen on Thursday Night Football. Why is that? These guys are a product of a routine. When you change up that routine midweek and you're playing on Thursday, things are just a little bit off at times. He is a huge risk. He will be a low confidence start for me, a little bit lower in the rankings, but you're going to see as this show goes on, there's a lot of guys with some tough matchups that you just don't know if you want to risk it or not. So Carson Wentz is going to be a low-end start for me here in Week 6. Justin Fields, I can't do it. I mean, he's coming off his best game of the season so far, 208 yards passing, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, had 8 rushing attempts for 47 yards, and he was so close to getting a huge touchdown run that really would have boosted his numbers last week, but this ain't horseshoes, so close doesn't really matter. Heck, the 1 touchdown he got in this game was his first one he's had in 3 weeks. They're only throwing the ball on average 18 times a game in Chicago. That's like Pop Warner numbers. Now they're going up against Washington, who allows over 19 fantasy points per game, 11th most in the NFL. There's no major injury concerns here for Justin Fields and the surrounding pieces, but as much as I want this kid to take a step forward, with that little amount of volume, little amount of production, we're overly reliant on huge plays that just aren't happening in Chicago, so I can't trust myself in starting Justin Fields just yet. How about we move over to Sunday football? San Francisco 49ers, Atlanta Falcons started off with Jimmy G, and he's just continuing to do what Jimmy G does. He has 5 passing touchdowns to only 1 interception over his last 4 games. In Week 5, had his best game of the season so far, though, 253 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions against the Carolina Panthers, but another team that just doesn't throw the ball very much. They're 28th in the NFL in pass attempts per game at 27. I mean, 27 is a low number. Just think about how low that 18 number is for Justin Fields now. But now they're going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who average right around 19.6 fantasy points allowed per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 10th most in the NFL. There's multiple offensive line injuries here as well in San Francisco that they're having to work through. But more than anything, there's just not enough passing touchdowns. There's not enough in this passing game overall to really get you excited to start Jimmy G. Great floor, safe floor. The ceiling just isn't high enough for me. He's going to lead them to victories. He's going to lead them to wins on the field, but not so much be a fantasy force. He remains a sit. His opponent, Marcus Mariota, currently quarterback 18 overall, and is super reliant on his rushing upside. He only has 4 touchdowns on the year and was saved last week by 61 yards rushing, which was the most that he's had in a game since Week 1, averaging only 24 pass attempts per game. These numbers are not getting much better over here. These matchups are not great for high volume quarterbacks. That's 31st in the NFL, 24 pass attempts per game. It's horrible. The matchup, now he's going against San Francisco, which is arguably the best overall defense right now in the NFL. Injury concerns, Kyle Pitts is banged up. Drake London is questionable. Still no Cordero Patterson here. There's not much here on paper that makes me want to start Marcus Mariota regardless of the matchup, and then you sprinkle on top that it's the San Francisco 49ers. No, I'm a pass. Thank you so much, though, for the opportunity. How about New England and Cleveland? Looking like we're going to have Bailey Zappi here once again, and not somebody who I'm excited to start either. He played pretty well last week, just a low ceiling, right? The offense overall in New England is going to be a low ceiling offense for no matter who you put at quarterback. This is not a Bailey Zappi issue. It was the same things that we saw with Mac Jones when he was healthy. Bailey Zappi is doing a fine job. He completed 81% of his passes last week. He was pretty solid overall. They only throw the ball on average 28 times a game, 27th in the NFL. Now they're going up against Cleveland, kind of a middle-of-the-pack defense against opposing quarterbacks, allowing 16 fantasy points per game. When it comes to injuries, Nelson Aguilar is banged up. Damian Harris will not be there. Jonnu Smith has missed some time. But like I said before, it doesn't matter if all those guys were still in this offense. The ceiling just isn't high enough to want to start the quarterback of the New England Patriots like we've wanted to in decades past. It's just a different type of offense, one that's going to rely heavily on the running game each and every week. So we're not starting Bailey Zappi. How about his opponent, Jacoby Brissett? No, I'm not starting him either. They're only throwing the ball a total of 32 times a game. New England is a lot easier to throw on than they are to run on. They're allowing 18.3 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks unless your name is Jared Goff and then they own you. There's no other major injury concerns here affecting Jacoby Brissett, but we know this is going to be an offense that runs through Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. They're going to get the bulk of the scoring opportunities in this offense, and Jacoby Brissett just isn't a fantasy option for me yet. How about the New York Jets and the Green Bay Packers? Zach Wilson. In a game in which the Jets just scored 40 points, Zach Wilson only threw the ball 21 times and had no passing touchdowns. That is crazy considering the fact they scored that many points, but he's looking pretty good. Each and every week, he's looking more and more confident, kind of like this entire team overall. He's averaging right around 17 fantasy points per game. He's finding ways to score points, whether it be receiving touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, passing touchdowns, whatever it is. Zach Wilson is finding a way. He himself is only averaging 28 pass attempts per game in his 2 starts so far this season. That's down from what it was with Joe Flacco. He was seeing 40 plus a week, but now the running game is starting to be a little bit more effective with Breece Hall and Michael Carter, and is taking away some of that volume from the quarterback position. Now a matchup going up against Green Bay, who's playing really good against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 12.7 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's 7th fewest in the NFL. There continues to be some offensive line injuries here in New York, something they've been dealing with for months there in New York, but this kid is starting to build some momentum, and the running game is really dominating the scoring right now for the New York Jets. But overall, all that's going to do in future matchups is it's going to draw opposing defenses in, because they're going to have to now account for this running game in New York. What does that mean to the passing game? Here pretty soon, we're going to have a lot of opportunities for one-on-one matchups on the outside for Corey Davis, Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Tyler Conklin. Big days are coming for Zach Wilson. Am I going to risk it here this week? Risk it for the biscuit against the Green Bay Packers? No, probably not. There's not quite enough in this passing game yet, but I definitely like the trend and the way that this team is moving. His opponent, Aaron Rodgers, who's now up to quarterback 19 after a very slow start to the year, now has 4 games in which he scored at least 2 touchdowns. His total passing yards are down slightly from his career average, but he's still putting the ball in the end zone. He's throwing the ball over 34 times a game, 17th in the NFL. The Jets allow 16.4 fantasy points per game, which is 17th in the NFL. Christian Watson somewhat banged up, but really the X factor here for me is the return of Randall Cobb, a healthy Randall Cobb. We heard Aaron Rodgers earlier in the week say, you know what, this guy's finally to a spot to where maybe like he looks like he did 4 or 5 years ago, and that's what Aaron Rodgers needs. He doesn't always want to have to force the ball down the field deep on the sidelines. He wants to be able to utilize Randall Cobb across the middle. Does that mean 13 targets a week? No, probably not, but definitely gives opposing defenses something else to worry about. Aaron Rodgers is going to be a start. How about Jacksonville and Indianapolis? Now, right now, Trevor Lawrence currently quarterback 15 overall and really struggled against the Houston secondary last week. I told you all that secondary was pretty solid. The Texans still a very underrated secondary for sure. This was the first game of the season, though, for Trevor Lawrence without a touchdown. But these two teams played each other already this season. It happened back in week 2. In that game, Trevor Lawrence went 25 of 30 for 235 and 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. They're throwing the ball on average 36 times a game. Indianapolis allowing right around 16 fantasy points per game. No major injuries in Jacksonville. They did lose offensive lineman Ben Bartch, which is a loss there on the offensive line, but there's some familiarity now with this opponent. And really, what I'm paying attention to here is the X factor is Travis Etienne. They're starting to involve this guy more and more each week. He is an explosive playmaker, and once he really gains his confidence in that opportunity in this offense, that's going to raise the floor every week for Trevor Lawrence. He's going to be a start for me here this week. His opponent, Matt Ryan, on the verge of being a start. Currently right now, quarterback 22 overall, coming off a game in which he had no touchdowns and was sacked 6 times against the Denver Broncos in that disgusting Thursday night game that we had to endure last week. The offensive line in Indianapolis is just bad right now. They aren't bad talent-wise, but right now on the field, they are not playing well whatsoever. The volume isn't an issue. They're throwing the ball 39 times a game, 8th most in the NFL. Going up against Jacksonville, they allow 14.2 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is 9th fewest in the league. You got Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines, Ashton Dulin, who's already out, and center Ryan Kelly, all banged up and may not be available for this game. That's going to affect Matt Ryan on a weekly basis. Now, I'm not going to sit here and underestimate the Jags defense like so many others do. I just need to see more consistency out of this offense and really try to find what is their identity. Are they going to push the ball down the field to Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman? Are they going to try to establish the run when JT gets healthy? What is going on in Indianapolis? And until we get an answer to that question, it's going to be kind of hard to really rely on Matt Ryan. He's a fringe sit for me. How about the Minnesota Vikings, Miami Dolphins? First up, Kirk Cousins. Quarterback 11 right now on the season and continues to play pretty solid football. Even has a touchdown on the ground last week. That's what I'm talking about, Kirk. It's just the consistency of this guy that so many people love in fantasy football. You can pretty much earmark him every single week for 16 to 20 fantasy points a majority of the season and really not be a liability to your roster. He's throwing the ball 40 times a game, 7th most in the NFL. Going up against the Dolphins, they allow the 4th most points to opposing quarterbacks of all teams out there at 22.7 points per game. No major injury concerns, but my X factor is this. It's the defense of Miami. Does Xavier Howard return this week? Because that secondary is pretty banged up and really allowing a lot from opposing quarterbacks right now. And outside of that, can the Miami Dolphins keep this game close enough to where we're not really relying on the running game late and Kirk Cousins can throw for all 4 quarters? But I say that because it looks like we may have Skylar Thompson once again on the opposite side of the ball for the Miami Dolphins. Tua has already been ruled out. We know that Teddy B is still in concussion protocol. We do not know if he will be available this week. So as of right now, we're planning, at the time of this recording, on going forward with Skylar Thompson, who just went 19 of 33, 166, 0 touchdowns, an interception, and a fumble. Now, on average, the Miami Dolphins throw the ball right around 35 times a game, but you have to expect that number is going to be slightly lower with Skylar Thompson. We probably see him right around that neighborhood of 30 pass attempts or so if he is the guy that starts this week. Minnesota allows the 14th most points to opposing quarterbacks at 17.4 per week. We know that Teddy B is still somewhat questionable, and Tyreek Hill is the other name we're paying attention to here as well. This offense needs Tyreek Hill if Skylar Thompson wants to have another option to really keep this game close. Remember, we got to keep it close if we want Kirk Cousins to continue to throw as well, because we're not going to start Skylar Thompson in fantasy football this week. How about Cincinnati and New Orleans? You got Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals, quarterback 6 on the season, and he really seems like he's being handcuffed right now by the play calling. The offense isn't as vertical as we've seen in years past here with Joe Burrow. They're not pushing it deep down the field very often. He hasn't had 300 yards in a game since week 1, but he does at least have 2 touchdowns in 4 of the 5 games he's played this season, averaging right around 38 pass attempts or so. In my opinion, they need to be over 40 in this offense, but I'm not the coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. Maybe I should be. Maybe somebody needs to make a phone call. Get the Bengals on the line. they definitely are not taking advantage of the weapons they have in Cincinnati. Now they have a matchup going up against New Orleans, not a cakewalk. They allow 15.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. The offensive line playing pretty bad in Cincinnati. We know that they're pretty banged up. Offensive tackle Jonah Williams is hurting. What about T. Higgins? Does he return? Definitely need T. Higgins back in this lineup to get that overall ceiling for Joe Burrow for sure. But the X factor has to be the play calling with a mixture of that and the injuries, and now a difficult matchup on the road against the New Orleans Saints. Had to drop the X factor down with all those unknowns, but we're still starting Joe Burrow. What about Andy Dalton as of right now, the starter in New Orleans? We do not know about Jameis Winston at the time of this recording either, and Andy hasn't played bad, but he hasn't played great either. He's yet to have over 240 yards passing in a game, and neither game in which he started does he have multiple touchdowns. They're throwing the ball on average 33 times a game. Cincinnati, though, is a very good defense against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 12.5 fantasy points per game. That is fifth fewest in the NFL. Michael Thomas is still banged up. Chris Olave is still in concussion protocol. Jarvis Landry is still hurting. Wide receiver Deontay Hardy is hurt as well. We don't know about Jameis Winston. Offensive lineman Calvin Thompson. They're all questionable to play. This offense is very beat up right now in New Orleans, and there's just too many, question marks for me to even think about starting Andy Dalton here in a very difficult matchup. What about Baltimore and the New York Giants? We'll start off with Lamar Jackson. You know you're starting Lamar Jackson, who is now quarterback 2 overall in the season, but has back-to-back games with only 1 touchdown and less than 200 yards passing. Now, that's not ideal, but he has had 2 tough matchups, the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals that we just talked about. Now, Baltimore, they're averaging 30 pass attempts per game, 25th in the NFL, which is not great. The Giants, pretty solid on defense. They only allow right around 14 fantasy points per game. Offensive guard Ben Cleveland is banged up, and so is wide receiver Rashad Bateman. Do we get him back this week? But it's the rushing upside once again for Lamar Jackson. I really believe, and this is more of a gut feeling, that's why I threw it under the X factor, that Lamar knows that this division is up for grabs right now. The struggles by the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals, this is the perfect opportunity for Lamar Jackson to put the team on his shoulders and make a statement and really go out there and chase that big bag of money that he wants in free agency. Of course, we're starting Lamar Jackson. For his opponent, Daniel Jones. He's currently quarterback 14 overall in fantasy football, and honestly, I don't know how he's doing it. He hasn't thrown for over 225 yards in a game. He has no passing touchdowns now in 3 straight ball games, and his rushing numbers are down in 3 of the 5 games he's played, yet he's still quarterback 14 overall, averaging only 27 pass attempts per game. Going up against the Ravens is a great matchup, though. They allow 23.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's second most in the NFL. Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Kenny Golladay, once again, all questionable. Basically has Darius Slayton, Richie James, and Saquon Barkley at his disposal, and that's kind of been enough to nickel and dime fantasy owners, but this matchup is so good. It's a home game. I would love to start Daniel Jones, but I cannot sit here in any way, shape, or form and tell you to start somebody that hasn't had a touchdown in 3 weeks and all of his wide receivers are hurt. It just doesn't make any sense. The risk is through the roof. I gotta sit Daniel Jones once again. How about Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh? Tom Brady? Yep, we're firing up Tom Brady here. After the slow start with no weapons, Brady is now all the way back up to quarterback 13 overall, has back-to-back games with over 350 yards passing, has no interceptions since week 1, and has 4 touchdowns over his last 2 games played. On top of that, averaging over 40 pass attempts per game. He's sitting right there at 41, 4th in the NFL. The Steelers' defense right now is just hurting, especially in the secondary. They're allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 22.1 per game. Julio Jones banged up, and we're still missing multiple pieces on this offensive line, which is leading to a lot more pass-catching opportunities for the running backs Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White. That's only helping boost the floor of Tom Brady each week because he's not losing offensive snaps to a running game. He's using his running backs as receivers, and that's why Brady continues to score points. He is for sure a start. What about Kenny Pickett? We really don't have a whole lot to judge Kenny Pickett off yet, right? I mean, I see some really good throws. I see some really bad throws, but he had a tough matchup last week going up against Buffalo. Came in the week prior, middle of the game, relieving Mitch Trubisky. The kid hasn't really had a fair shot to go out there and really get his feet wet. He's yet to throw a touchdown, though, which is something to pay attention to. Pittsburgh averaging right around 36.4 pass attempts per game, 14th in the NFL. But now he gets a matchup going up against Tampa Bay, who, even though they've been beatable as of late, they're still a solid defense, allowing only 15.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is still 21st overall. No major injury concerns on the offensive side of the football for Kenny Pickett. But honestly, I see this game kind of playing out similar to last week for Kenny Pickett. Maybe not so much the blowout of the scoring, but having to play from behind, throwing the ball a lot of pass attempts. Is he going to be able to work through his progressions? Does the pass rush get to him? There's a lot going against him in this matchup, and we just need more time to look at Kenny Pickett before he becomes a fantasy option. How about the Carolina Panthers and Los Angeles Rams for Baker Mayfield? You're not starting Baker Mayfield. I know you're not starting Baker Mayfield, but what does this offense look like now that Matt Rule is gone? Because it has been super vanilla all year long. Baker has only gone over 200 yards once in the last month and only has 4 passing touchdowns on the year. Not huge passing volume, 31.8 pass attempts per game, which is 23rd. Now, similar to the Tampa Bay defense we just referenced, kind of the same thing for the Los Angeles Rams. They haven't been overly dominant here as of late, allowing 16 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but Baker himself is banged up. Sounds like he's going to play through it, but we really don't know what this offense is going to look like here this week. It doesn't even really matter, right? We're not starting Baker Mayfield here this week regardless. What about Matthew Stafford, though? Somebody who's definitely been struggling. He is down to quarterback 23 overall, has 1 passing touchdown over his last 3 games played. I mean, what the f*** is going on? You have that many offensive weapons in an offense run by Sean McVay, and you got 1 damn passing touchdown in 3 games? He's got more interceptions than touchdowns. He's been sacked 12 times over the last 2 games played and is getting no help from his running game whatsoever. He's still throwing the ball a lot, 39 pass attempts per game. That's 9th in the NFL. Carolina, kind of middle of the pack defense against opposing quarterbacks, 16.5 points allowed each week, but there's multiple offensive line injuries, and I'm really starting to think that this team misses Van Jefferson. I mean, we've seen what? Cooper Kupp, maybe a target going the way of Allen Robinson, maybe one going the way of Ben Skoranek, and then back to Kupp, Ben Skoranek, Allen Robinson, Kupp. The opposing defenses know what's going to happen, and even though Cooper Kupp continues to go off, opposing defenses have figured out that, hey, if Kupp's the only guy that we got to worry about here, we're more than likely going to have an opportunity to win this ball game because he can't do it all by himself. Let's just pressure the hell out of Matthew Stafford. And that's exactly what has happened here as of late, and he has not been a fantasy viable option. If you're stuck in a bye week and you have to start Matt Stafford, it is a huge risk despite being a okay matchup on paper. How about the Arizona Cardinals and Seattle Seahawks? Start off with Kyler Murray, and it doesn't feel like it. Like when you just watch the games, it doesn't feel like Kyler is doing a whole lot. I've even had people, in the comment section here recently say, I'm kind of seeing if I want to upgrade my quarterback. I got Kyler Murray. He's quarterback 5 overall on the season, averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. He has 8 total touchdowns on the year to only 3 turnovers, and he's 1 week away from getting back DeAndre Hopkins. But I don't disagree with that person. Like on paper, I'm like, yeah, maybe you can find an upgrade. I don't think you're going to be able to. Quarterback 5 overall, he's still putting up points. He's averaging over 43 attempts per game, most in the NFL, and his running game is completely banged up, meaning he's going to have to continue to throw the ball a lot. Now he gets a matchup going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Right now, they allow the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 19.9 per game. There's multiple, injuries on the offensive line. James Conner is banged up. Darrell Williams is banged up. They've brought in Corey Clement. They're trying to find a running back that can stay healthy here, and Eno Benjamin just isn't that bell cow guy. We're going to see a lot of Kyler Murray. Once again, he's going to remain a start, which takes us to their opponent, the Seattle Seahawks, and Geno Smith. Geno Smith is pretty good. He's quarterback 7 overall on the year. And then you see stupid reports coming out here as of late that Drew Lock is on the heels of Geno Smith. Pete, stop it, Pete. Don't be stupid, Pete. Don't ruin a good thing. Geno is out there just absolutely balling. He had arguably one of the best throws I've seen down the seam to Tyler Lockett for a touchdown last week that I've seen almost any quarterback make here as of late. Geno Smith is playing great football. Don't you do this to us, Pete, and he's only having to throw the ball 31.8 times per game, 23rd in the league. Now he gets a matchup going up against the Arizona Cardinals, who allow almost 20 fantasy points per game themselves, 8th most in the NFL. Offensive lineman Gabe Jackson is questionable, but this guy needs more credit. Geno Smith is playing so well and so confident right now, and he still has big-time weapons to use. Yes, we lost Rashad Penny, but now he's got Kenneth Walker. We know about DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. In Arizona, they can be torched through the air at times. I don't mind Geno Smith once again. He's going to be a start. How about the Buffalo Bills and Kansas City Chiefs? My Manscaped matchup of the week. That's right, Josh Allen against Patrick Mahomes. But as soon as this video is over, make sure you head over to manscaped.com. Get your holiday shopping done early. Find something for that special someone. Take care of them. Get them something for their bathroom bag. It's not just ball trimmers. Just make sure you use promo code HEADLINERS at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. But how excited are we for this matchup between Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes? Starting off with Buffalo, Josh Allen currently the quarterback 1 overall, coming off a huge week 5, and now he gets a matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. This is the primetime matchup that we need. This should be Monday Night Football, not the Denver Broncos and Los Angeles Chargers. Why is this not Monday Night Football? Josh Allen's averaging over 41 attempts a game, 5th most in the NFL, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, who allow the 7th most points to opposing quarterbacks at 21 per game. Sure, Isaiah McKenzie's banged up, Jake Kumerow is banged up, Dawson Knox is banged up, but it doesn't really matter when you have yourself a healthy Gabe Davis that can stretch the field and really open up things underneath. For Stephon Diggs, still plenty of firepower in this offense. We're obviously starting Josh Allen, and the same can be said for Patrick Mahomes. Currently quarterback 4 overall in the season, now has 3+ touchdowns in back-to-back games, showing the rushing upside a little bit too here lately, Patrick. 2 to 3 fantasy points a week in rushing upside from Patrick Mahomes. I will gladly take that each and every contest. He's still averaging, though, under 40 pass attempts per game at 38th, 11th in the league. Going up against Buffalo is no easy task, though. They're allowing only 10.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But this is Patrick Mahomes, and I don't give 0 Fs on who he's playing. This guy can go out there and score on anyone, and he's playing so well. Right? I almost think all he needs is Travis Kelce at this point, right? Him and Travis Kelce alone could go out there and beat, multiple NFL franchises. I have a feeling, though, this is going to be one of those games where somebody else steps up. I don't know if it's going to be MVS or Juju or Mecole Hardman or who it may be, but somebody else in this offense I feel like is going to have a big game to really keep this game close and exciting. But we're obviously starting Patrick Mahomes. How about the Dallas Cowboys and Philadelphia Eagles? Start off with Cooper Rush. This dude, if I didn't know any better, I would think that he was related to Jimmy G. They're basically identical when it comes to fantasy football. He's going to lead the Cowboys to victory. He's going to play well. He's not going to turn over the football. He's going to have a low ceiling, and they're going to win ball games. He only had 102 yards passing last week, and they still won. He's being super efficient. Only 29 pass attempts per game is 26th in the NFL. But now a matchup going up against Philly isn't exactly ideal. They only allow 12 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 4th fewest in the league. Dalton Schultz is banged up, but most importantly, we already knew we had a ton of injuries on the offensive line. They brought in Jason Peters, who played well, and now he's injured. I love what Cooper Rush is doing for the Cowboys, but not in fantasy football. For Jalen Hurts, not the greatest of matchups for him either, if we're being completely honest, but Jalen Hurts currently quarterback 3 overall in the season, but it's that rushing upside that has really helped him the last couple weeks. He has no passing touchdowns now in back-to-back games, which is not ideal. However, he's had at least 1 rushing touchdown in 4 of the 5 games so far this season, throwing the ball right on 32 times a game. Going up against Dallas, they only allow just over 12 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, 6th fewest in the NFL. Another team dealing with injuries on the offensive line. You got Jordan Mailata and Jason Kelce banged up. They need them in Philadelphia. But could you ever sit Jalen Hurts right now? I don't see a world with bye weeks where you could say, you know what? I think I'm going to sit Jalen Hurts. Not a great matchup on paper, but the way that this guy can really carry you with just his legs alone means he's going to be a weekly start. And then Monday Night Football, we mentioned it a little bit earlier. The Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Chargers. We'll start it off with Russell Wilson, who you can see is in the sit column this week, which may surprise some people out there. He's currently quarterback 17 overall, coming off the worst game that I have ever watched on TV in my entire adult life. Only has 2 passing touchdowns over the last 3 games played, and hasn't thrown for over 300 yards since week 1. Throwing the ball right around 34 times a game, going up against LA is not a bad matchup. They allow 18 fantasy points per game. There's multiple offensive line injuries, though, here once again in Denver, plus Russ himself dealing with a shoulder injury in which he had to have a minor procedure and is considered day-to-day right now. That's something to pay attention to, but I expect this offense to bounce back at some point. And I will continue to say that this entire year. They are too talented to not figure it out at some point. When is some point, Jake? We really have no idea. If you have to start them each week, it's a huge risk. Once they figure it out, once it clicks a little bit, maybe once Russ stops being so damn awkward in commercials, maybe then we start thinking about it, but I got to see it before I trust it here once again. Gonna have to sit Russell Wilson this week, but his opponent, Justin Herbert, because right now it's week 6, and damn, I'm feeling fancy right this second. He's quarterback 10 overall in the season, and he's doing it without Keenan Allen, which is surely lowering his ceiling each and every week, but his floor is still super safe. 275 yards passing in 4 of the 5 games played. 10 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions. He's averaging 268 yards and 2 touchdowns over his career against the Denver Broncos, throwing the ball over 40 times a game. But it's just not an easy matchup, right? The Denver Broncos defense is the only reason they're remotely close to winning ball games right now, because they're allowing only 10.9 fantasy points per game, 3rd fewest in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks. We know another team dealing with offensive line injuries. What about Keenan Allen, who's still questionable? But it's really the involvement of Austin Eckler once again in the passing game that's really helped elevate Justin Herbert here over the last few weeks. He's really leading them to victory on his short little tiny shoulders all by himself, and fantasy owners are absolutely loving it with Justin Herbert. Even though it's a difficult matchup, he's going to be a start for me primetime football on Monday night. So there you have it, my starts and sits for the quarterback position here, week 6 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to shed a little bit of light on some of these crappy situations that we got going on this week. I know bye weeks are here for the next few weeks. We're going to kind of have to deal with some of these difficult matchups here, but that's okay. That's what the purpose of this show is. It's just to give you that information so you can make the best decisions possible for your team. Maybe you're sitting there saying, Jake, I got 2 guys on my roster that are starts or 2 guys that are sits. What do I do? Don't worry. Rankings will be out Thursday before that game, so you can make sure you have your lineup set, good to go, and ready for the weekend. But for now, I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.